While 2018 didn't give me a whole lot of great movies to pick from, you better believe it gave me plenty of bullshit. I could have almost made a top 20 or 30 list out of all the worst movies I saw this year because there was so much bad stuff to come out this year. But I limited myself to 10, and here they are. Number 10 on my list comes from the master of bad movies. It's Tyler Perry's Acrimony. Let me start off by saying I feel Tyler Perry gets a lot more crap than he really deserves. Best known for his long-running Medea character, who's apparently making her final appearance this year, I don't despise the guy as much as other people do. His movies are extremely sloppy and dull, but I can vouch that they do try to have some kind of well-intended lesson, as perfunctory as it might be. Also, when compared to anything Adam Sandler and Marlon Wayans have dished out within the last few years, you could do way worse than a lame black comedy by a cross-dressing playwright. With that said, Acrimony is not very good. Taking a stab at making a darker, more serious movie, Perry only further defines himself as one of the most what the fuck were you thinking filmmakers today. Acrimony is a movie that shoots itself in the foot. Taraji P. Henson plays a woman who starts out in the film as the main protagonist before becoming the villain of her own story as she harasses and eventually tries to kill her ex-husband and his fiancée. Now, this is not a bad concept. In fact, if it were in the hands of a better director, it could work. Someone who comes to my mind is Spanish director Pedro Almodovar, who has proven himself as a master of both erotic, suspenseful melodramas and movies with strong female leads. Unfortunately, this story's not in Almodovar's hands. It's in Tyler Perry's, and as a result, it gets torpedoed by its heavy-handed execution, corny dialogue, and inane final act that plays out like you remade Fatal Attraction for the Lifetime Network. Number 9 is Peter Rabbit. Beatrix Potter must be rolling in her grave. Much like the lead in Acrimony, Peter is a character who ends up looking more and more like the bad guy of his own movie as it strolls along from one obnoxious and noisy set piece to the next. Featuring the same uninspired and cynical nonsense that plagued Sony's last disaster, the movie is about as charming as a pile of roadkill, and the title character is such a dude bro-ish douche that I'm surprised he's not voiced by one of the Paul brothers. How are you supposed to root for your main character when the antagonistic Mr. McGregor is so much more likable and has far more logical and reasonable motivations? Peter Rabbit is a mean-spirited family feature that doesn't hold a candle to the warm and whimsical Paddington 2, as well as a monumental failure of adapting a beloved literary work. Number 8 is Venom. And here I was worried DC's Aquaman was going to be a disaster. In the same year the DCEU released its decently entertaining adaptation of The King of Atlantis, it was this Marvel misfire that should have had everyone concerned. Venom is a joke. It's a movie that has no grasp on tone, storytelling, and especially character. The Venom in this movie is so lame and sanitized, he makes Topher Grace's Venom from Spider-Man 3 look badass. Tom Hardy gives an absolutely embarrassing performance as the clumsy Eddie Brock, whose chemistry with the titular antihero feels less like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde relationship and more like the pairing of Steve Martin and Lily Tomlin in the 80s screwball comedy All of Me. Apparently, there was approximately 40 minutes cut out of the original version of this movie to get it a PG-13 rating, which doesn't make any sense in our post-Deadpool and Logan world. Venom is one of the most chaotic superhero movies to come along since Suicide Squad, and the worst Marvel film since Josh Trank's Fantastic Four reboot. The story is impossible to follow, the special effects look like they're from the late 90s, and while watching it, it feels like it should have been released around the same time as the hilariously bad Catwoman, back when the only person making great superhero films was Sam Raimi. While movies like Black Panther and Infinity War pushed the boundaries of this genre, the incompetent and convoluted Venom sets it back almost 20 years. Number 7 is The House That Jack Built. I have a theory about Lars von Trier, and that theory is he decided years ago to stop making good movies and just make abusive and insufferable anti-art trash and see how long until critics and audiences realize they're just being trolled. Note that I am not basing my opinion of this movie on my thoughts on Lars von Trier as a person, and that everything I have to say comes from the fact that I really did hate this movie. This character study of a retentive OCD serial killer was unpleasant to say the least, so much so that a review of it would just be a list of unbecoming adjectives, most likely stilted, pretentious, gross, despicable, and repetitive. At 2.5 hours long, The House That Jack Built is almost 3 times longer than Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, yet doesn't even accomplish half as much. I had this same reaction to Von Trier's last film. This movie is to Henry what the nymphomaniac duology is to Shame. I get that a movie like this is destined to be divisive, but I unfortunately fell on the wrong side of the line between love and hate, relying on shock value rather than psychological intrigue. The house that Jack built is unwatchable. Number 6 is Night School. Bad comedies are hard to sit through, and bad Kevin Hart comedies are even worse. I do think Hart is a funny guy. I've just yet to see him in something I actually found tolerable. If Melissa McCarthy's Life of the Party was a second-rate version of Rodney Dangerfield's Back to School, then Night School is a second-rate version of Life of the Party. Just for starters, it doesn't look well produced, as the sets look like cheap Saturday Night Live backdrops. This sitcom pilot of a movie doesn't have nearly enough material to last the entirety of its runtime, nor does it generate a single laugh. Great comedy comes from great observations, not from just a bunch of obnoxious characters sitting around ranting and insulting one another. If you thought that a movie which credits 6 writers, including its lead actor, would be able to come up with something at least remotely clever, you're sadly mistaken. Number 5 is Breaking In. It's just like Panic Room. If Panic Room sucked, Breaking In boils down to a reversed version of David Fincher's early 2000s home invasion thriller, but without the good performances, interesting plot developments, compelling characters, or flair for style. Gabrielle Union has to attempt to break into her father's top-notch security home to save her children from thieves looking for... I can't even remember. This is such a forgettable trash movie. Just take my word for it that it's just another superficial placeholder film for when movie theaters are hit with slow weekends. It's a movie with no new ideas or really any ideas at all that hits every home invasion cliche you can think of. The bad guys aren't believable because there's nothing really keeping them from just killing everyone, and the movie is just boring to sit through. Sadly, it's not even the worst thriller on this list. Number 4 is 50 Shades Freed, evading topping this list only because it was so unintentionally hilarious. This finale to one of the worst romance sagas since Twilight is the epitome of cash grab trash. Easily the most enjoyable movie I've put on this list for just how ridiculous and unintentionally hilarious it was. 50 Shades Freed was the send-off fans were hoping for, and the so bad it's good laugh riot those who've hated these movies wanted as well. I said all I needed to in my Available Now review for this movie, and while this movie is terrible from a creative standpoint, it's a movie I almost had as much fun watching as I did watching the Marvel releases of this year. From the insane plot points to the dreadful chemistry between the two leads that's still just as bad as it was back in 2015. 50 Shades Freed is still a garbage movie intended to be marketed to a cynical public that unironically watches it for its lowest common denominator qualities. So long, Mr. and Mrs. Gray. You won't be missed. Number 3, Slender Man. 2012 just called. They want their bad horror film based on an internet fad back. Does anyone even remember that Slender Man was a thing? Even if that faceless, forgotten pop culture fixation was still relevant, this movie still wouldn't have been worth seeing. Even less scary than the long list of bad horror films from the last several years, the confusing and amateurish Slender Man sets the bar for bad, scary movies even lower than it already was. The acting is awful, the effects are awful, the editing, script, and everything else in Slender Man is awful. Seriously, I have seen Slender Man videos on YouTube that are scarier and better made than this movie. It makes the Bye Bye Man look like The Conjuring by comparison. Thank God films like Hereditary and A Quiet Place are still getting made, because thoughts of the horror genre becoming completely saturated with movies like this are what keep me up at night. Number 2, Traffic. The only reason this movie will ever be mentioned ever again is in this hypothetical situation. Hey, you want to watch Traffic? Oh, that early 2000s Steven Soderbergh directed Best Picture nominated Oscar-winning masterpiece about America's relationship with its feudal war on drugs? Sure. No, man, not that Traffic. This one. With a K. How do you make a movie about a woman accidentally encountering a human trafficking ring this boring? The acting in this movie is on the level of direct-to-DVD quality, and the story is uninspired to the point it makes Kidnap look smart. This movie is not riveting or important. It's exploitive and self-important. It even tries to claim it's based on a true story for no other reason than because human trafficking exists. That's like saying Baby Driver is based on a true story because Getaway Drivers exist, or saying the Garfield movies are based on true stories because Cats exist. Traffic is a mean-spirited, rotten-to-the-core movie with zero scope of its real-life issues and offers absolutely nothing to the conversation that it thinks it's having. And the number one pick on my list is Show Dogs. Holy crap. Taking my number one for the worst of the year is a movie I made the shortest length into before having to shut it off, and I don't regret that decision. Movies like Show Dogs don't turn around in the second half and then suddenly become tolerable. I saw within that half-hour time frame all I needed to. If you've even glanced at the poster for the movie, then you know all you need to. Will Arnett just needed a paycheck really bad, and this must have been the only option. Not only would I call this the worst movie of 2018, but I also call it the worst movie of 2005 because that's when it feels like this movie was made. Shitty talking dog movies haven't been in for a really long time, and the fact that Ludacris stars as the voice of the lead Rottweiler just adds to this movie's outdatedness. Yeah, Ludacris, remember him? He's totally still relevant. Show Dogs is a movie for an audience of no one. The poor parents who had to sit through this garbage, I imagine, were completely uninvested in any of its lame and juvenile crap. Meanwhile, the insane animal smuggling plot is so outlandish for a kids' movie that I could see little ones not even paying attention to it. This is a movie that is so lazy, unoriginal, and offensively cynical that it completes the terrible family feature triad along with last year's The Emoji Movie and Kevin Spacey's 9 Lives from 2016. The most interesting thing about Show Dogs is the controversy it faced when it was released, which revolved around jokes involving fondling a dog's genitals and making a reference to pedophilia and child grooming. In doing this, Show Dogs managed to push away the only people who would even bother to see it unironically. The people who made this movie had one job: make something generic and forgettable, and they couldn't even do that right. If you haven't seen Show Dogs, don't bother, you're not missing anything. This is not a fun, bad movie. It's just a bad movie. A movie so bad that after having revisited it, I'm considering taking a trip to my own happy place. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to also check out my video of the best films of 2018. As usual, I'm Logan D. McCoy, and this is Real McCoy Reviews.